Hey everyone, welcome back to a new main channel video, and today we're going to be taking a look at an article I found titled "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books." And I feel this ties in quite well with another video I made not that long ago about TikTokers who just simply don't want to read books that have too many words, because words are hard and they don't want to read things. Apologies if there's changing light in this video. There's like quite low sun today by my windows and it's a little bit blinding at times. It keeps coming in and out of clouds, but I've done what I can and we'll just work with it if that's okay. So like I say, this reminded me of a video I made not too long ago about TikTokers angrily ranting about how books had too many words, not enough dialogue, they didn't want to read anything but action, 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 and gratuitous sex scenes every other chapter. Here's a clip of some of those videos I responded to if you need a refresher.
Why the is this book? First of all, the writing is so tiny. Second of all, why are the pages so filled with so many words? Like, what the Why the everything I read is a flashback. I don't give a about your previous life. I really don't. I just want you to get your high score and I just want to read action, action, action. I don't care what you did as a child.
Does anyone else skim read their books? And by skim read, I mean only read dialogue. Like, you don't read description. Because personally, I don't care what someone looks like, I don't care where they are, I don't care what they're doing, I care about the conversation.
I like pages that aren't filled with this many words. Like, literally every page is like look at this! Are you kidding me?
So what ended up happening is I'm sitting here reading this new book and I turn the page and there's a paragraph on the page this long. It goes from the top of my Kindle to the bottom of my Kindle. It's that long. And I skipped it, okay? I skipped it.
Okay, you got me there.
Now, this article is obviously about a very different context, but it's still about kind of people's reading experiences and preferences, and it's something that's a little concerning, so let's take a look. This was written by Rose Horowitz. Nicholas Dames has taught literature humanities, Columbia University's required Great Books course, since 1998. He loves the job, but it has changed. Over the past decade, students have become overwhelmed by reading. College kids have never read everything they're assigned, of course, but this feels different. Dames' students now seem bewildered by the thought of finishing multiple books a semester. His colleagues have noticed the same problem. Many students no longer arrive at college, even at highly selective elite colleges, prepared to read books. And this is what's quite concerning. I want to make sure I'm kind of like walking a fine line in this video because there's a lot of nuance here and there's a lot of stuff that needs discussing, and I am going to cover multiple perspectives and points, so don't worry. Because you don't want to come across as like elitist and like but at the same time, like, this is people's education we're talking about, and we can't just be all like, ugh, whatever, let them do what they want about it, because education is important, you know? So this development puzzled Dames until one day during the fall 2022 semester when a first-year student came to his office hours to share how challenging she found the early assignments. Literature humanities often requires students to read a book, sometimes a very long and dense one, in just a week or two. But the student told Dames that at her public high school, she'd never been required to read an entire book. She'd been assigned excerpts, poetry, and news articles, but not a single book, cover to cover. And that is kind of crazy to me, because I know this is talking about America, and I'm English, so there is a cultural difference there. And I know I'm quite a bit older now, in my 30s, but this is wild to me. I remember, like, back even just doing, like, GCSEs, we had, like, 2 novels, maybe 30 poems, and a play to cover, right? A-levels were, like, each year was something like... Let me think about my final year. So final year we did Othello, The Great Gatsby, Wide Sargasso Sea, and then I also did Caroline Duffy's The World's Wife and Grace Nichols' The Fat Black Woman's Book of Poems. They were my main texts. Oh, and then also The Duchess of Malfi and The Poetry of John Donne. We had a whole book of his poems to cover. Like, it was a lot of reading. So that's a novel, a novella, 2 plays, and a lot of 3 books of poems. And even I thought that was quite light for a literature course over a year. Anyway, not the point. But the thing is, like, when you're studying literature, it's important to not just look at things like as excerpts on their own and be like, whoa, this passage suggests it. You need to look at it in context and understand the entire context of a book and how the pieces all fit together in order to really get the full picture. And not just the context of what's in the book and in like, so the story if you're reading a novel, but you need to understand the context outside of it. What was the historical and social context of what was happening at the time? What other books had that author written? What other books were their peers writing at the time and reading, and what was popular, and what shaped this novel into becoming what it is? That said, I think there's always been some concern about this stuff, because I just have a little anecdote about my own school. So my school was not a good school. It was, when I was there, one of the top 10 lowest funded schools in the country, which is not something anyone wants to brag about. And other than a few of us in my year, it was actually a real struggle to get a lot of students to even scrape a pass at GCSE. There were a lot of reasons for that. Mostly the kids just weren't motivated and didn't want to learn. It's as simple as that. We did have split ability sets for most subjects, especially the main ones like maths, English, the sciences. And that was helpful for me because it meant that everyone in your class was at your ability, and you weren't, in the nicest way, you weren't being held back by others, and you were really pushed to, do the best you could. In most cases, some teachers weren't great. Anyway, not the point. I did hear stories of some of the kids in lower sets who, like I say, they just didn't want to learn, and they'd basically be assigned the bare minimum possible to just try and get them to at least scrape a pass. So say at GCSE we had a whole poetry anthology to read, and then there were often short stories, and then there was a play, and then there were 1 or 2 novels, right? What they do instead for the lower sets was get them to focus on say 2 to 3 poems, and then an excerpt from a play or an excerpt from a novel, and give them just enough to be able to scrape an answer together while only making them read 3 to 4 pages of text. Because you knew those kids weren't going to read the books anyway. Some of them, in the nicest way, couldn't read the books, but the school was so worried about funding that they did whatever they could to make sure these kids at least scraped a pass. They weren't teaching the kids to make sure the kids had those skills. They were teaching them to make sure they at least got some marks to reflect better on the school. And I want to make it clear, when I'm being critical of this, I'm being critical of the teaching strategy and the teachers, not the kids who were taught that. Do you know what I mean? Well, even then, it's hard to be thoroughly critical, because ultimately the teachers are in a really difficult position where they had to do what they could to make sure the school just stayed open and got funding. So it's complicated. Even then, I can't be completely against it. Anyway, the point is, that was still happening even 15 plus years ago. It was happening back then, but the problem was the good thing was it wasn't the norm. It was just a last resort for a school full of kids who didn't want to be there in an establishment that was struggling to even stay open. The worrying thing is the fact that that style of teaching, which was a last resort, and it was kind of emergency measures, if you want to put it that way, is now seeming to become the norm amongst the majority of schools, even good schools, across the world. That being normalized is a little scary for the state of education and the abilities of kids today. We kind of have to ask, is it a symptom of education being too focused on teaching to the exam and not teaching for the sake of, and not teaching for the sake of spreading useful knowledge and information and helping kids to learn real useful skills? Or is it a last resort for educators who simply don't know how to reach kids who these days have a limited attention span? Maybe it's a bit of both, I don't know. The article goes on saying, "My jaw dropped," Dames told me. The anecdote helped explain the change he was seeing in his students. It's not that they don't want to do the reading, it's that they don't know how. Middle and high schools have stopped asking them to. And to me, this suggests it's a little bit of a cyclical problem. There have always been plenty of kids who didn't want to do the reading, who didn't really want to learn the material they were supposed to be studying, so it seems like schools began to pander to them more and more at the expense of other kids who maybe would have done the reading with a little push, or who were keen to do the reading. Then those kids who were keen or would have done it suffered and didn't learn the skills, and now it's a matter of these kids simply not knowing how to engage with longer texts rather than a few of them not wanting to, And of course, it's probably not just the education system that's lowering their attention spans, but everything in general. We have way more of a focus on quick, fast, often low effort. I don't want to be sound too rude, but often low effort content that is both low effort in terms of what it takes to produce it and also what it takes to consume it. People want this constant instant gratification now instead of really taking their time to consume and enjoy a piece of media. And I feel like this is causing shorter attention spans, and then that's having a knock-on effect to the education system, and then the education system can't deal with it, so they're pandering to, well, not pandering, but they're adapting to that, but then it's causing more problems, and it's a big bad cycle, you know? I also think it's important at this point to mention that, of course, not everyone has to be good at reading, and not everyone has to enjoy reading. I think it's an important part of education, but overall it's not something that everyone needs to do well, if that makes sense. I do think it's absolutely okay for people to have different strengths and skills and things they enjoy, and we absolutely shouldn't shame people with different interests or different learning abilities or anything like that. And this is absolutely not at all about shaming people who struggle with reading, you know, maybe they have dyslexia or something. Like, it's not about shaming people like that, of course not. I feel like this is a point that I didn't quite drive home enough in that book talk video, and I should have made myself a bit clearer, so that's on me. That video was never meant to be about shaming people who need to read, for example, bigger fonts or different layouts of books, or they prefer e-readers because they can change the layout, or, you know, they have certain different reading abilities. It was never about shaming those kinds of people. It was about shaming the lazy attitudes and consumerism and this whole, like, reading for aesthetic's sake instead of because you actually enjoy it as a hobby. I don't think I made that clear enough in that video, and I want to kind of make it clear here that, again, that's not what I'm talking about. Here I'm talking about how, like, amongst the people who simply can't be bothered to read more than a couple of short lines, it's the laziness that's the problem. And then that becomes a bigger problem because they don't have the attention span to read anything longer, they don't have the ability to read anything longer, they don't have the comprehension skills to read anything longer, and that does affect their education. And when they have a poorer education, they come out of it with worse skills, and then that affects people in the real world because people can't do their jobs as well. The point is, we can't downplay the importance of reading and proper comprehension skills, because it's not about being elitist here. It's about making sure people have the skills they need to be able to properly communicate with others, to be able to properly understand others, and to be able to advocate for themselves through communicating, you know? People need these basic skills like reading and comprehension to be able to understand the world around them. And the things that will affect them. If we don't teach people these skills, then people who do have them can and will take advantage of it. But at the same time, there's no use just like sitting here and complaining about, ooh, kids these days. Like, we have to ask, is there a way to appeal to kids with different attention spans these days? Do we need to teach them in a different way? And also, what's caused this? Because it's more than just the education system, surely. It's also got to do with parenting, tech, social media, media in general. You know, it's a bigger picture, and it's all worth thinking about. This does seem to be an ongoing problem as well, because the article points out, in 1979, Martha Maxwell, an influential literary scholar, wrote, "Every generation at some point discovers that students cannot read as well as they would like or as well as professors expect." Dames who study the history of the novel acknowledge the longevity of this complaint. Part of me is always tempted to be very skeptical about the idea that this is something new. And yet, I think there's a phenomenon that we're noticing that I'm also hesitant to ignore. 20 years ago, James's classes had no problem engaging in sophisticated discussions of Pride and Prejudice one week and Crime and Punishment the next. Now his students tell him up front that the reading load feels impossible. It's not just the frenetic pace, they struggle to attend to small details while keeping track of the overall plot. It's a huge thing if you're studying literature. No comprehensive data exists on this trend, but the majority of the 33 professors I spoke with relayed similar experiences. Many had discussed the change at faculty meetings and in conversations with fellow instructors. Anthony Grafton, a Princeton historian, said his students arrive on campus with a narrower vocabulary and less understanding of language than they used to have. There are always students who read insightfully and easily and write beautifully, he said, but now they are more exceptions. Jack Chen, a Chinese literature professor at the University of Virginia, finds his students shutting down when confronted with ideas they don't understand. They're less able to persist through a challenging text than they used to be. Daniel Shaw, the chair of Georgetown's English department, told me that his students have trouble staying focused on even a sonnet. So what you can see here from just these anecdotes, and the pattern that like I and others have seen, obviously, is that this isn't just a handful of students struggling anymore. This isn't just a handful of students who have different learning abilities or whatever, or who have different needs. This isn't just a few kids who just, oh, maybe they're not interested anymore. This is becoming a wider problem that does need to be addressed on a larger scale, because it's affecting even the people who used to be good students, if you want to put it like that. Well, it's a bit of a loaded term. It could be easy to sit here and think, oh, they're just not reading boring old novels. What's the big deal? Just as, you know, like when I've spoken in the past about like the rise in the popularity of poorly written, often problematic novels by the likes of Colleen Hoover. I've got a Penelope Douglas video coming up that I'm working on. People like that, the Zodiac twins, you know, and people are like, what's the big deal? At least people are still reading. But I do think it's a big deal, and I think there is more to it than this. Again, I'm always going to say there is nothing wrong with enjoying an easy to read book, an accessible book, a simple book, a fun book. But if that's all you're engaging with, or you're refusing to engage critically with any texts, then you are missing out on a lot of skills and opportunities for learning. And there are certain skills which you may have had before that you're no longer practicing, which are going to kind of wither away with time, if that makes sense. The article here pointed out a couple of those issues. Kids can't keep track of small details or complex plots. Kids have a limited vocabulary. I'd like to add to this that a lot of these books, like the ones I'm talking about, like the Colleen Hoovers and whatever, not so much the ones that are not studying at uni. Anyway, yeah, the other issues with like only consuming those kinds of books is that they kind of normalize harmful or abusive behaviors. There's a heavy reliance on telling and not showing in the writing, which stops readers from ever having to critically engage with a book and actually think about or assess what they're reading or why. People generally have worse comprehension skills, people have shorter attention spans, and so on. And again, this might not seem bad on the surface because you're like, ooh, it's just a novel, it's just a story, but it does lead to bigger problems in the real world. If people don't have these skills and they're stuck with these short attention spans and that sort of thing, then people will not be able to critically assess news or other information presented to them. People won't be able to remember details of things that happened in the real world, either in regards to politics or social policies that may directly affect them. People might not be able to fully understand the policies of people that they're voting for, or be more likely to fall for harmful, dodgy propaganda. See the Brexit vote, see Trump getting into power, see the world right now. We're also going to see the problem of people not having the attention span to engage in long-form content and therefore missing out on considerable amounts of information, only ever getting surface-level information and not ever diving any deeper. It's not just about politics either. If people can't fully concentrate on or understand long-form text, then how are they going to be able to read, I don't know, a leaflet explaining a medical procedure or a medication they have to take? They might ignore things like information about the side effects or the risks, and therefore they won't be able to give properly informed consent before they have that procedure or take a medication. And again, not just in regards to medicine, can a person really give informed consent if they can't fully understand what is being communicated to them because they don't have the skills? It sounds extreme, but it's a real problem. And it's one that we are seeing day to day. The article says that failing to complete a 14-line poem without succumbing to distraction suggests one familiar explanation for the decline in reading aptitude: smartphones. Teenagers are constantly tempted by their devices, which inhibits their preparation for the rigors of college coursework. Then they get to college and the distractions keep flowing. It's changed expectations about what's worthy of attention. Daniel Willingham, a psychologist at UVA, told me, being bored has become unnatural. Reading books even for pleasure can't compete with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I read while making a YouTube video. In 1976, about 40% of high school seniors said they'd read at least 6 books for fun in the previous year, compared with 11.5% who hadn't read any. By 2022, those percentages had flipped. So that's 40% of high school students in 2022 who just haven't read any books for fun. But even before that, I think this gets to the crux of the issue. It's not just about kids not reading books. It's about how people in general, even students, even like, you know, what's meant to be higher education, top level students, just don't have the attention spans. And not reading books isn't the cause of that, it's a consequence of it. It's a symptom of it. And those that do want to read for fun or for work or school or whatever, they always just go for the short, quick reads that are dialogue heavy and just tell you what to think. So they're still not critically engaging with these texts. There's still not any labor that needs to be done, which again is fine for every now and again when you want a break and to relax. But when that's all you're reading, you're not developing any skills, and you're actually letting really useful, important skills slip from your mind. The brain is like a muscle. You have to keep working it out and learning new things and trying, otherwise you will lose a lot of skills. And this all comes with its own problems in terms of how we address education. If we know kids have shorter attention spans now, then what do? Do we adapt our ways of teaching them to suit that? Because we can't just complain and let them get left behind. We actually have to do something and come up with that. I mean, not me, I'm not an educator, but hopefully facilitating a discussion for educators and other people, and for you guys to go ahead and think about and consider when you vote in your next politicians, you know? But yeah, so you can't just complain and let these kids left behind. So do we try and adapt our ways of teaching to suit their new short attention spans? But then in some ways you're just kind of giving up and not giving them a chance to develop certain skills in regards to engaging with long form content. So how do we make sure they still learn those skills while, I don't know, while adapting to, I don't want to say the new problem, but while adapting to the new problems, do you know what I mean? It is a really difficult balancing act. Like, you might just want to be, okay, if the students find it too hard to concentrate on writing an essay, let's find a new way to assess them that suits them better, that suits their abilities, that, you know, that suits these new different abilities they have. However, let's not forget that essay writing is an important skill in itself, because it's not just writing for the sake of it. It's testing understanding of a text or a scenario or a situation. It's testing quality of written communication. It is also testing your ability to concentrate, your ability to form a cohesive argument, your ability to critically engage with, again, a text, a situation, whatever, and so much more. So if you are saying, well, let's change our approach and our ways of teaching and assessing, how do you do that while still making sure the kids are learning all those skills and testing all those really important skills? I think what people forget is that, like, they're like, oh, it's just a stupid poem. Or why do I need to know that the blue curtains mean sad? It'll never help me in the real world. But it's not about that. Like, I mean, obviously I love studying poetry because I love poetry. But for me, it was about so much more than learning about poetry. It was about learning how to engage with texts, to see that one piece of text can have so many different meanings and symbolism and understanding, and then all these different perspectives can come into play. One person can read a text in one way, one person can read it in another. The social context affects the literature, and literature affects society, and so on. It's a big, beautiful cycle of art and life inspiring and informing each other, and it's kind of beautiful. And those kind of critical thinking skills and ability to critically assess a piece of text isn't just about understanding poetry. They're skills that you can apply to so many different texts and pieces of media, and I think it's really important that we do learn to critically engage with the content in the world around us, you know? That is a really important skill, because otherwise you take everything you read at face value, you just believe everything being shown to you, you don't start thinking, well, why have they written that? Why did that person write it in this way? Why did they use this word here? What are they trying to say? What are they doing with this? Who wrote this and why, you know? That's how people end up, when you don't critically assess like that, that's how people end up falling for like dodgy propaganda, or just not engaging in critical thinking around certain materials, and then you fall for misinformation and, you know, bad stuff. Let's go back to the article. Middle and high school kids appear to be encountering fewer and fewer books in the classroom as well. For more than 2 decades, new educational initiatives such as No Child Left Behind and Common Core emphasized informational texts and standardized tests. Why is that so hard to say? Teachers at many schools shifted from books to short informational passages, followed by questions about the author's main idea, mimicking the format of standardized reading comprehension tests. Antero Garcia, a Stanford education professor, is completing his term as vice president of the National Council of Teachers of England and previously taught at a public school in Los Angeles. He told me that the new guidelines were intended to help students make clear arguments and synthesize texts, but in doing so, we've sacrificed young people's ability to grapple with long-form texts in general. And this is what I was saying earlier about teaching kids to pass exams rather than teaching them the actual skills they need. And also what I was saying about, like, okay, well, if we adapt our teaching skills, and are we missing out on teaching them certain things and them learning certain skills? I also feel like when you just teach to the test rather than teaching them to actually engage in books and content and stuff like that, you are kind of demonizing books a little bit, and you are kind of being like, oh, well, you don't need the whole context, it's not important, and you're downplaying the beauty of the novel, the importance of the novel. You're not really allowing kids to fully understand or enjoy what it's about. And I feel like, as we're seeing in more and more countries, especially in like states in America as well, which is crazy, more and more places seem to be banning books these days, and banning like beautiful, gorgeous, lovely books, but they're being banned for absolutely stupid reasons. And while that's bad for its own reasons, I also think it plays into this idea of demonizing the idea of reading in general. And so if now we're seeing kids don't have reading comprehension skills, they don't critically engage with texts, and some of them are being banned, but they don't have the ability to engage with why they're being banned and why that's a problem, it's genuinely concerning. And it feels like the whole education system is working against young people to make them more vulnerable to misinformation and propaganda and listening to terrible people. I'm trying not to get too political here, but anyway. Alternatively, with the whole banning books thing, it would actually be really cool if you could try and get kids to be rebellious these days by reading, you know, like, ooh, challenge the status quo, read a book. Go against authority, read a book. The new punk is to read a book. Actually, that's been a little bit punk, hasn't it? But you know what I'm trying to say. I don't know how realistic that is, but I just think it'd be quite fun. I like it. If you're a young person, go out there, be crazy, read some books, create a zine's still a thing. I love zines. They feel very 90s, but go create some crazy zine about like the best banned books you need to read and how you can read them, and ooh, do that. Be rebellious, kids. Actually, adults, be rebellious too, please. Love it. Everyone be a bit rebellious. It's fun. Okay, back to the article. In a recent Ed Week Research Centre survey of about 300 3rd to 8th grade educators, only 17% said they primarily teach whole texts. An additional 49% combine whole text with anthologies and excerpts. But nearly a quarter of respondents said that books are no longer the centre of their curricula. One public high school teacher in Illinois told me that she used to structure her classes around books, but now focus on skills such as how to make good decisions. In a unit about leadership, students read parts of Homer's Odyssey and supplement it with music, articles, and TED Talks. She assured me that her students read at least 2 full texts each semester. An advanced placement English literature teacher in Atlanta told me that the class used to read 14 books every year. Now they're down to 6 or 7. So, a bit in the middle here about, like, you know, teaching good decisions and that sort of thing. Like, that doesn't sound so bad on its own. It really doesn't. You know, teaching kids useful skills, using literature and books and texts to exemplify certain points, that's all really, really good, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I just think it needs to be done in context too. A passage from a book you've never read or really know a brief summary of can be useful, but sometimes it's important for a kid to learn and explore the context on their own and to pick out the key passages for themselves and learn that an excerpt from a piece of text can mean one thing on its own, but mean an entirely different thing in context. And I think it should be less about, like, telling a kid this is what this means and this is what to think. I think we should be focusing more and more on teaching kids to discover this for themselves and have fun with it, you know? One of my favourite things about writing essays back at, like, sixth form and stuff like that, like about literature and whatever, was when you'd get an essay title, you'd be like, ooh, I'm thinking of all these ideas. And I used to write a lot of feminist essays about, like, so I think when I was doing the Duchess of Malfi and the John Donne poems, it was like, how do Webster and Donne, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something about exploring the portrayals of women and their sexuality alongside, like, religion and religious imagery. So it's really, really fun, and basically I had to be like, oh, okay, here are my key ideas, and then go through the play, go through the poems, and be like, well, these show this idea, but then these show this idea, and then this and this, and then you're comparing and contrasting, and then you'd bring in some, like, historical information from the times they were written, and some, like, literary theory about it all, and be like, oh, you know, and then at the time this critic said this, but today readers think like this, and this critic has said. It was really fun, and it wasn't just about reading a text and regurgitating some stuff. It was, like, investigative, and you went out there and you're like, ooh, what are all these different opinions? And then finding the passages in the text and dissect, like, that was the fun. And I feel like kids today are, oh god, I sound like such an old person. Kids these days, back in my day. Oh god, sorry, old woman here. And I'm only 31. Oh god, I'm nearly 32. I don't even know my own age anymore. Where was I even going with this? Yeah, I do worry that kids these days aren't being allowed to explore in that way because they aren't being taught the skills to do it. That's what's concerning. The article goes on to say that the issue Dames and other professors have observed is distinct from the problem at community colleges and non-selective universities, where some students arrive with literacy and comprehension deficits that can leave them unable to complete collegiate courses. High-achieving students at exclusive schools like Columbia can decode words and sentences, but they struggle to muster the attention or ambition required to immerse themselves in a substantial text. And I think that latter bit there, that's what the problem is. It's not when kids or students don't have these skills, because that is something that you can work around. As long as they've got the willingness to learn, they can learn in different ways, they can approach it in different ways. That's not a problem. The issue is, even when you have these like smart kids, they don't have the attention span or the ambition or the willingness to learn, and that's what the problem is. Faced with this predicament, many college professors feel they have no choice but to assign less reading and lower their expectations. Victoria Kahn, who has taught literature at UC Berkeley since 1997, used to assign 200 pages each week, which is nothing really, is it? Now she assigns less than half of that. I don't do the whole Iliad, I assign books of the Iliad. I hope that some of them will read the whole thing, Kahn told me. It's not like I can say, okay, over the next few weeks, I expect you to read the Iliad, because that's not going to do it. And again, this just kind of epitomizes what I was saying earlier. How far do we go in lowering our standards and expectations to help students before that just starts hindering them? And let's be honest, when you're studying at university level, 200 pages a week should not be a lot. I can smash that out in less than a day when I'm working on a video that I'm inspired by. And that's the thing. I think it's because I'm inspired and interested and want to engage. And that's something that a lot of students today don't seem to be feeling or finding. And I think that's what the problem is. Anyway, I just have such like conflicting feelings about this, because on the one hand, education is super important and should be accessible to everyone. But then again, things like further education, especially at a university level, that isn't a right, that is a privilege, and a privilege that should be earned through hard work, right? And I feel like up to 18, the age of 18, accommodation should absolutely be made to ensure that everyone achieves a certain standard of knowledge and skills. But post 18, people have options. And I think it should absolutely be okay for a person to be like, well, actually, I don't have the skills I need to complete this degree. I don't have the motivation to do it. I don't enjoy doing it. I'm going to go do something else instead. And I think it should be okay for them to seek a different career path instead of the university having to make accommodations and therefore lower their overall standard of teaching. Like, if a university student can't read 200 pages a week, maybe university isn't right for them. Of course, it's more complicated than that. Don't just listen, don't just stop listening there. So of course, that doesn't account for people who genuinely do need a bit more help. There may be health concerns, there may be different learning abilities, and there's people who have that stuff going on that can still achieve amazing things with just a little bit more support, and we absolutely should make accommodations for them. That is not something I'm ever going to be against. Completely believe that. I want to make it clear that there's a huge difference between like, hey, I had this different ability here, but I really want to learn and do this. Is there a way we could make some accommodations so I can learn these skills and have these great achievements, versus, I have a short attention span, I don't want to read 200 pages, make it easier for me. And that means they won't learn the required skills, but they still get an achievement, you know? There's a big, big difference there. And of course, it gets more complicated when you look at society as a whole, because it's easy for me, entirely hypothetically, to be like, okay, well, maybe university's not for you. If you're not enjoying this, if you don't have the motivation, maybe it's not for you. But the problem is, in my we'll try a different career path argument, the problem is that the state of the economy in so many countries, especially places like the UK and America these days, is so damn crap that without a degree, and even in many cases with a degree, people won't be able to learn a living wage. So while that might sound good in theory for me to be like, hey, if you're not enjoying it, just go try another career path, get another job. But that's not always possible for people, because our economy is screwed. Minimum wage is far too low. It's not a living wage. Workers are already being screwed over. So it's complicated, and it's one that I don't have an ideal solution for. I genuinely don't know. But I do think it's something that needs thinking about. I don't know. Like I say, I also don't want to sound like elitist with this stuff. I'm just trying to present possible alternatives but we're in a position where, sadly, not all of them are viable. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway. The article goes on to say that the Columbia instructors who determined the literature humanities curriculum decided to trim the reading list for the current school year. It had been growing in recent years, even while students struggled with the reading, as new books by non-white authors were added. Like Delbanco, some see advantages to teaching fewer books. Even the best prepared students have probably been skimming some of their literature humanity assignments for years. Joseph Howley, the program's chair, said he'd rather students miss out on some of the classics, Crime and Punishment is now off the list, but read the remaining texts in greater depth. And crucially, the change will give professors more time to teach students how they expect them to read. And this does seem to be a really good solution to me. Maybe get students to read fewer quality books, or fewer books that will actually pique their interest and make them want to keep reading, instead of being like, oh, well, this is a classic, you have to read it, when maybe it's just not as interesting to students these days, maybe it's not as relevant to where they are in society. I think there are ways that we can maybe change what some of the texts are to get them more engaged with it, and this seems like a good solution, you know? I feel like the issue here isn't necessarily how many books they're reading, but how closely they're reading the books. So in many cases, it might be better to, you know, get students to really closely read one book instead of skimming passages of 10 books that they've never actually read in full, you know? Again, though, not a perfect solution. It's not clear that instructors can foster a love of reading by thinning out the syllabus. Some experts I spoke with attributed the decline of book reading to shifts in values rather than in skill sets. Students can still read books, they argue, they're just choosing not to. Students today are far more concerned about their job prospects than they were in the past. Every year they tell Howley, despite enjoying what they learn in literature humanities, they plan to instead get a degree in something more useful for their career. And again, I think this is kind of missing the point of what skills studying literature teaches, because it's not just about like, ooh, it's just about enjoying books. It's about having those critical thinking skills. So maybe we need to address how we teach literature and humanities to make sure that kids are aware that these are the skills they're supposed to be learning and taking away from it, you know? The same factors that have contributed to declining enrollment in the humanities might lead students to spend less time reading in the courses they do take. A 2023 survey of Harvard seniors found they spend almost as much time on jobs and extracurriculars as they do on academics. And thanks to years of grade inflation, in a recent report, 79% of Harvard graduates were in the A range. College students can get by without doing all of their assigned work. So mostly in regards to that first bit I spoke about people not studying humanities anymore, like, I think this brings up a good point, and it comes back to the issues with the job market that I touched on earlier, but I still don't think it addresses the major problem here. The issue here isn't that kids aren't reading big novels, it's that they're not reading and critically engaging in long-form content in the field they want to study. It's clear that the same problem happens among students studying in other subjects too. So this isn't just about the decline of the novel, but it's about a decline in attention span, a decline in expansive vocab, a decline in critically reading texts, a decline in motivation to learn, really. And that's what the problem is. The economic survival of the publishing industry requires an audience willing to be able to spend time with an extended piece of writing. But as readers of a literary magazine will surely appreciate, more than a venerable industry is at stake. Books can cultivate a sophisticated form of empathy, transporting a reader into the mind of someone who lived hundreds of years ago, or a person who lives in a radically different context from the reader's own. A lot of contemporary ideas of empathy are built on identification, identity politics, Kahn, the Berkeley professor, said. Reading is more complicated than that, so it enlarges your sympathies. Yet, such benefits require staying with a character throughout their journey. They cannot be approximated by reading a 5 or even 30-page excerpt. According to the neuroscientist Marianne Wolf, so-called deep reading, sustained immersion in a text, stimulates a number of valuable mental habits, including critical thinking and self-reflection, in ways that skimming or reading short bursts don't. So again, this is coming back to the issue that I've had with like a lot of book talkers and other books and stuff like that, and the mass consumption of poor quality writing. There's such a focus on this like consumerist idea of buying as many books as possible and quickly reading as many books as possible and just skimming through them and getting through it and only reading the action dialogue bits. These books that are poorly written and focus on surface level dialogue and tell the reader how to feel, and they often encourage toxic behavior, toxic relationships, abusive behavior. Again, looking at you, Colleen Hoover, Zodiac Twins, Catherine Ann Kingsley. And it's like junk food, you know? Consuming that stuff every once in a while isn't going to harm you. But if it's all you're consuming constantly, then you're not going to gain any of those aforementioned benefits. Learning empathy, understanding others, learning critical thinking or self-reflection, and so on. And that is what I think the problem is. So, that's the last bit of the article that I want to talk about. I know I've given you a hell of a lot to think about here, and I don't have any solid ideas about how to improve things or make things better, but I hope that at least this has started a conversation and got you thinking about how you engage with longer form text and long form media, how you engage with short form media as well, and how maybe it's not so healthy for you or your attention spans or your critical thinking skills. And also, like, if you have kids or young people or students in your life, then maybe just have a think about, like, you know, what they're learning, why, have a chat with them, see what they think about it. I don't know, I think it's just a lot of stuff to think about. And yeah, it's an important one to keep discussing. So please let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Try and stay kind to everyone down there and be respectful of each other's opinions. That'll be really good. But yeah, for now, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. I also did this thing recently where I released a really cute little pack of bookmarks, and I posted about it over on my community tab, and I put a video over on Instagram, and they sold out straight away within like 2 hours. And I only had like 24 packs of these available, and I'm getting them all posted and sent out over this weekend. But although I'm not sure when I'll be able to go to the post office, because that's always a trek for me. But yeah, they sold out really quickly, and I didn't realise there would be that much demand for them. So I do have an option to maybe get another 50 or so in, if that's what people want, but I just kind of want to know if this is something people are interested in. It's like £5 for a pack of the full bookmarks and a sticker, and then it's like £2 postage and packaging to the UK and £4 to the rest of the world, which just covers postage costs and envelopes and my time getting to the post office, basically. I tried to keep it all as cheap as possible, but yeah, obviously postage is quite expensive because Royal Mail. But yeah, I'm rambling now. I'm so bad at the self-promotion thing. So these bookmarks are something you like and you missed out and you want me to do more of them, I can do another like 50 or so packs on my website if people want that, but I just want to see what the demand is before I go and pile any more of my own money into it and order any more, because yeah, anyway, time is hard. Right, okay. But for now, thank you so much for watching. If you are new here, it'd be wonderful if you want to subscribe. I talk about everything from like books to social commentary to feminist issues to kind of like atheisty stuff and deconstructing harmful religious practices and beliefs and things like that. It's a little bit of everything here on this channel. It's quite fun. If you want to join me as a channel member, I've started doing these really cute little like trivia quizzes over on my members tab, which is really fun, where you can go and learn some fun facts and have a little guess at the quiz, and that's great. And you also get little custom like emojis and stuff that you can use in comments and stuff like that. I'm going to try and do a few more live streams this year as well, so you can use them in there as well. But yeah, I've been struggling with the confidence with live streams recently, but I do want to try some again soon, so I'm trying to give that a go. And also, if you go and support me over on Patreon instead of memberships, then I post, I've got some really cute little art videos over there that I've just posted for you guys. I've got lots of photos and behind the scenes stuff over there. I've got some script notes, I've got book recommendations. It's a little bit of everything really. And on Patreon as well, you can get this really cute thing where I think it's at the $5 and $10 tiers. Don't quote me on that, I'll have to check. But also all the tiers are named after Kyra, so you have like Team Pickle, it's very cute. But at some of the higher tiers, you can get these exclusive stickers and art and photography prints sent out to you every 3 months, which is really fun. So that's a nice reason to join over on Patreon, and also it just helps support my channel and helps me keep making these videos, and I appreciate it ever so much. But I'm rambling, I'm bad at the self-promotion. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, I appreciate you guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.